Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 14th of November 2023. You wouldn't know it's November since I've just eaten 2 mince pies with my last cup of tea. I've got mince pies hanging around the house. Anyway, quite delicious. It's not. It's November. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But you can still eat pigs in blankets and, I don't know, roast turkey if you want. Right, what are you talking about, Shut up. Moving to the front line, first of all, check out the key to my map. If you don't understand what the lines mean on my map, please pause the video and check it out there. We'll go to the northeastern, axis from Kupiansk down to Zaporizhia to Crimea here. There is, although I don't map deep state up here, I say I, thanks JR, did the mapping today, legend. Even though I didn't map it here, apparently there is a good couple of kilometer improvement for the Russians in this area of the map near Yehidne in the northeastern corner there. The ISW talks about there being 15 attacks in the general area. That's not a huge amount of attacks, to be honest, but it just shows that there's fairly consistent activity right up and down the front line as far as I can work out. Okay, so the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, talks about in this area Russian forces continuing localized offensive operations along that line and making confirmed advances. So the geolocated footage published on the 13th indicates that Russian forces advanced west of Volodymyrivka. Right. First of all, if you are astute, you would remember that if you watch my rant about Ukrainian place names in my extra video yesterday, where I just did a 7-minute, just couldn't believe my eyes that there were so many place names with the same name. You would know that we looked at 3 Volodymyrivkas yesterday, so that's rather topical. Anyway, the one they are talking about is in Luhansk, which is here. Now, does this show a gain? So what happened? First of all, a truck went off the road and then was hit by drone dropped munitions. Well, that is here, and that is definitely not signifying. Again, this is about 1.5 kilometers behind Russian lines, I'm guessing there. Let's see how far that really is. So 2.3 kilometers behind Russian lines, or there or thereabouts. So does this signify and Russian advance? No. You know, you've got a supply truck behind Russian lines. I don't understand sometimes. I mean, I love what the ISW does, but some of those claims to advances just make me scratch my head. Anyway, not a lot to report of this whole axis. There is repelled. There have been repelled attacks, of course, as per normal. A spokesman of the Ukrainian brigade operating in the Kupiansk direction stated that Russian forces are often in the area often conduct assaults with groups of up to 10 personnel each, with 4 or 5 vehicles, squad-sized elements with limited combat power. This is quite different, actually. We have heard in other places that they're going back to using meat assaults, so heavy infantry-based assaults, heavily infantry-based. Here, you've got 4 or 5 vehicles with only 10 people. That's, as it mentions, reducing the combat power. I mean, there's not a lot you can do short of just driving around. Perhaps shooting off whatever munitions you have attached to the vehicle. But yeah, so anyway, that's what's reported there by the Ukrainians in the area. Right, we're going down to Bakhmut, and as you can see, some gains by the Russians, as according to Suryat maps and indeed deep state map particularly in this northern area by another Yehidne, by the Bakhmut reservoir. ISW says here. As you can see, that's fairly sizable gains. I think it's about 1.5 kilometers or something. The Ukrainian army had been put on the back foot. Russian army had made significant advances south of Bakhmut reservoir and Yehidne, thus approaching the road between Kromove and Chaziv Yar. So that's that main supply route, the 0506 coming into northern Bakhmut. This happened following an important withdrawal. So there again, we hear mention of a kind of operational withdrawal of the Ukrainians to the north of Bakhmut, in this Bakhmut reservoir sort of area. An important withdrawal during the previous days of the Ukrainian army towards more defensible positions. Moreover, it's important to note Russian army has recaptured a big part of the lost territory during the Ukrainian counteroffensive last June. It would be interesting to see if Russians can exploit the advance in the next days. So that is, I guess, bad news for the Ukrainians in the area, finding it somewhat more difficult but they are operationally withdrawing to better positions, not wanting. I mean, at some point, if you remember, they were in Bakhmut village there, and then since they got in there, they've just been consistently moving back over time for a good, I guess, maybe a couple of months now. Although it's been very slow and the Russians have been chipping away here and there, this signifies, if it is true, a really much larger Russian gain. Then we go to the south near Klishchivka. So we've got Klishchivka here. We've got that railway that bends round and comes to the south. And the Russians seem to push the Ukrainians back to that railway. And in some places over the railway, at least according to Surrey maps. The Russian army, he says here, advanced north of Klishchivka, retaking part of the forest area adjacent to the railway. So far, no troops have entered the locality. So they've retaken the area, but no troops have entered. I think what they mean there is, rather than taking this, rather than talking about troops entering here, he's talking about Klishchivka as a whole. So these rumors going around that the Russians have taken Klishchivka back, and that seems to be wildly optimistic as far as I can work out. So I think he's talking about they've taken this, but there are no troops in the locality of Klishchivka. Right, the ISW does talk a little bit about this, says, if we come down, the Russian forces have continued localized offensive operations near Bakhmut yesterday and made a confirmed advance. Geolocated footage published on the 12th shows Russian forces advance west of Yahidne. So let's go and see their claims of advance here. And actually, this is about, it's a video showing 6 Russians being hit by drone drop munition. The original claim is in Avdiivka. It's not. It's here in near Yahidne. So this is where Russians are in order for them to have a drone dropped on them. Let's plug that in before we return back to Klishchivka. I can actually do the correct thing. No, clearly not. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Yes, I do. So that is where it is. Yeah, that shows, well, it shows an advance on previous mapping, but sometimes ISW, I think because they've taken so many different mappers, they have their different levels of how sure they are that each side is in a particular position. This will show for them an advance from previous mapping, but I think ours being quite a current map here, changing every day. Sometimes their idea of an advance is possibly not an advance on the map from yesterday. Nonetheless, that does show that the Russians are forward from where they were, and they're certainly south of the Bakhmut reservoir as was. So, yeah. That's looking tough for the Ukrainians in that area. But then going back to Klishchivka, the ISW states a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces pushed Ukrainian forces out of Klishchivka several days ago, while another mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces still control Klishchivka. ISW has not observed visual evidence of a Russian advance into Klishchivka itself. Now, you can be rest assured that if the Russians had done that, they would be shouting about it with evidence. The fact that there is no visual evidence of them doing it is probably evidence that they haven't done it. Now, this is, if you're getting technical, this is called an argument from silence. And I was talking about this on my other channel last night. So the argument from silence is, to get a bit philosophical with you, is this idea that if there's no evidence that something has happened, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And so you can understand that's fallacious. Like, the Russians might well be all over Klishchivka. They might control it. There's just no video evidence to suggest that. Now, because there's no video evidence to suggest that, doesn't mean it didn't happen. The problem is that is not as valid as you think it is as an argument, or not as decent an argument when you would expect that evidence, right? So the example I always give is, if you go to your neighbour's house, like in your own town, your next door neighbour, and your next door neighbour says, "Oh, you've been out for the weekend. Guess what? There was a 7.5 Richter scale earthquake yesterday in town." You're like, "What's there?" I can't see any evidence for that. There's no broken windows, no buildings are falling down. And you walk out around town, no one seems to know anything about it. You ask people, and there's absolutely no evidence for an earthquake of a 7.5 on a Richter scale. So you conclude that because there's no evidence where I would absolutely expect it, that is disconfirming evidence of that claim. Right, so it's useful to understand these techniques. So when we're looking at different sources, how do we understand that? So although it doesn't disprove 100% that the Russians aren't in Klishchiivka, the fact that there's no evidence for it when you would absolutely expect the Russians to be shouting about it, presenting like drone footage of them in Klishchiivka, the fact that there is no evidence that is disconfirmation of that claim being true, I would surmise. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't in some of these little buildings, maybe on the outskirts of Klishchiivka. That could well be the case. But the idea that they have control over Klishchiivka, I think, is fanciful. It might happen, but there you go. Some Russian sources claim that the Russian forces advance in the direction of Bodanivka, that's north of Bakhmut, and establish new positions near the Bakhmut reservoir, as we just talked about. But it's, as I say, ISW observes no evidence of the Russians being in control of Klishchiivka, but they might well have made this advance along that height towards the trench line there, which I think would be very useful for the Russians. If they're going to attack anywhere, like I've said before, like Andrew Perpetual always says, the village is useless as far as it offers no intrinsic value. It's just a bunch of rubble. But this higher ground up here with the entrenchments and dugouts and trench lines and fortifications with its view over the local area is much more useful. And so it's no surprise that the Russians are looking to make gains along here. There was talk about them trying to get into the village previously, and they might still be trying that. That's less sensible. Anyway, moving on. Well, actually, let's just see what Rebar says. So Rebar talks about in the Solidar direction, which is kind of Bakhmut. Technically, that's north of Bakhmut, but they kind of use that for the whole Bakhmut area often. They said that the Ukrainian formations regularly use chemical munitions. Unfortunately, this is now a given, is the claim. I don't know if that is actually true. As someone says, okay, along with lightsabers and blasters. Yeah, of course, mate. So we move on to the south, to Avdiivka. No changes to the north, but before we go to the south, let's look at what the ISW have to say, because several Russian mill bloggers claim that fighting is ongoing near the Avdiivka coke plants and a waste heap in northern Avdiivka. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces control at least half of the Avdiivka coke plant and that alleged reports of Russians capturing the plant are false. This is a Russian source saying, no, we don't control, we haven't captured the coke plant because the Ukrainians control at least half of it. Well, if the Ukrainians control at least half of it, it means that half of it, up to half of it, is either grey zone or in Russian control. Now, again, no evidence of this. Would we expect there to be evidence? The Russians would be shouting about this. I think once they're in here, it is a really big problem for Ukraine. So I would doubt that they are in there, but they are making those claims. So perhaps there are elements of Russian presence in somewhere in the coke plant. It would be, as I say, just a really big challenge for the Ukrainians going forward if that is the case. But no movements according to the mapping in this area. It is a bit knife edgy around here. You know, any more serious gains for the Russians, and the Ukrainians are definitely seriously on the back foot in that northern Ukrainian area. Before we go to talk about the south, well, actually, no, we will go to talk about the south now. Here, as you can see, there's some gains there. We'll go first of all to the Severny area, where I think, yes. So around here, Barracuda has done some geolocation, saying, well, there's more. Look at this mess. Previously, 6 BMP, 1s and 2s, IF infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed. In addition, 12 military vehicles and 2 tanks were destroyed in the same area. It's worse than Vuhledar. This is talking about video footage of Russian losses around Vodyane. It appears north of there, they've just lost all sorts of equipment. And you can see that's in the last 3 or 4 days, destroyed 13th of November 11th and November 13th. So fairly recent, not those early ones destroyed from the initial attacks on Avdiivka. 14th of November over here. So there are destroyed vehicles all over the shop. That one's probably a Ukrainian one that's all the way up there. Vodjanya over there, and all of these geolocators. So it's still difficult around Avdiivka. The Russians are still losing a lot of stuff. The question is, are they making incremental gains as well? Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces successfully counterattacked and advanced near Avdiivka on the 13th. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced on the to the railway station near Stepova and near the Staroska Ochota restaurant immediately south of Avdiivka. So that's interesting. Claims that the Ukrainians have made some gains back up here towards the railway station. Not exactly sure where that is, whether that is this railway station. There's several around here. There's one that's been blown to bits up near Ocheretny. The Russians hit with munitions, but I presume that's around there. So there could be a counterattack around there. But what's also mentioned is this counterattack that was talked about yesterday. There seems to be geolocated evidence, although the mappers haven't changed, Andrew Perpetua nor Syriac maps here, but there was evidence that the Ukrainians were here, pushed the Russians back across the road by this bridge, and that's the restaurant they're talking about there. That would be the gains for the Ukrainians in that area. Well, Syriac Maps talks about this particular area and gives quite a bit of analysis here. A situation south of Avdiivka, the information is quite dynamic on this axis, which has gone unnoticed since the beginning of this new Russian offensive against the Ukrainian stronghold. While the Russian army focused on reducing the encirclement of the city, even with limited advances from the north and south, other troops have been working on the 2014 Ukrainian defense line, destroying key defense points using artillery, drones, and tunnel bombs. This is the area that they claim that they dug 160 meters and then blew up underneath a Ukrainian position. This has allowed a weakening of the defences that has been exploited by Russian tanks to penetrate this line and shift the fighting for the first time to the Promka industrial complex. There is still no confirmation of the capture of these positions, badly damaged by the bombardments of these years of conflict, but it is not surprising that the Russian army has decided to assault frontally such a fortified city without having consummated the encirclement. Many ex-Wagner forces are fighting in this area with enough experience to penetrate defences like the ones we saw in Bakhmut, which ended up being taken without the need for a complete encirclement. It is very possible that the same happens with Avdiivka if the Russians manage to progress from the south and reach the first urban areas. Well, I think they're possibly going to have more problem in the south. There's talking about here, this kind of area where according to direct maps, the Russians are pressuring the Ukrainian defences, but I think they're unlikely to force their way too successfully from the south. They lose a lot. It's flat land here. I think they're going to have more success going into the Avdiivka coke plant and Stepova to the north. Anyway, to continue going a little bit further south, we've got some gains for the Ukrainians in towards Pisky, in the Pervomaisky area, but also slight gains for the Russians there as well, at least according to Syriac maps. It says situation northwest of Donetsk. During the last week, Ukrainian army recaptured some more areas within Pervomaisky, while the Russian army recaptured some positions north of the adjacent ponds. And that is represented on my map here. But the Ukrainians, there have been these claims that the Ukrainians have been pushing the Russians back quite a bit there. Some claims the other day that actually this whole area is a grey zone and the Russians really control up to this bridge. So it could be that all the mappers there aren't quite as accurately portraying this as is reality, but I think when it comes to people like Andrew Perpetua, he likes to be a bit conservative with the mapping and doesn't just go on, what rumours there are, and needs good solid evidence to change his mind, and that's always good to hear. Right. As we move further on, we come down to a still active Frontline around Mariinka, Novomerkulivka, but no changes to the mapping there. The same can be said about Vuhledar and onto Velika Novosilka that has kind of spiked in the last few days in terms of activity, but nothing too much to report in terms of what the ISW say. Activity active around Priyutne, yet again, which is this village south of a kind of ravine area where the Russians originally were defending, then were pushed back, and they seem to have fought their way back to controlling that area. And then we come across to Robotsina, further to the west over here. I don't have any sources of any activity around here. There was a little bit of joy for the Ukrainians over the last 2 or 3 days in this area, both north of Verbove and around Novoprokopivka. Talk about them being inside Novoprokopivka, the very edges thereof, yesterday, but haven't heard much along those lines today. Russian Mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted larger than usual assaults with tank support north of Verbove, and that mutual shelling is going on. But other than that, really, it's all the usual kind of repelled attacks, etc., etc. There could be a meaningful attempt for the Ukrainians to take land north of Verbove. And then we come out to zoom out to look at Kherson Oblast and Dnipro River. There's a lot of talk still about Krinky. Reporting from Ukraine, I think their video was on Krinky again last night. We'll go and look at some of these reports here. So, no report says Russian channel 2 majors about the situation near Krinky. Situation in the area near the settlement of Krinky remains tense, they say. The enemy is concentrating heavy equipment on its bank. Electronic warfare continues to cover the positions, and also at night the SDF and GUR groups are actively working with 120mm mortars. Since the beginning of the month, we have been waiting for the meeting with the commander of the Dnipro group to discuss pressing problems. This is a Russian saying this, including communication and supply issues. So far, the meeting has been postponed. There's a lot of complaints coming from Russians still out of the Kherson region. In fact, I talked to you this morning about this chap who complained. He's from Kamchatka in the east. What's he have to say? He says, I want to finish this video from the Kamchatka battalion. Some of the translation here is a bit weird. So, it's not just me speaking weirdly. It's just how it's translated. Who were sent to the slaughter, who were just sent to the slaughter, who did not even train people. Here are such children, 18-year-old, untrained, who came only to 4 days spent. It was flashlight in the Avdiivka drill. So I don't really know what that is. A bit of a glitch. I think that's what P-Star 11 said. People were arrested. They were sent to the mart, and then it glitches. Blah, 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 blah. And then carries on. We are sent to do nothing. We buy for them all this account of the battery, the radio, the equipment. One thermal imager costs 180,000. So basically what you get out of this is just moaning a lot about getting hold of equipment. He says, we can't live with one thermal imager. We also have a family. We have no one to feed. We have no food. Food comes here once a week. And it's very difficult to get through it because everywhere there's shelling, everywhere the sniper works, everywhere the mouth works. The mortars are shooting at us every day. Every day there are 200 and 300, so killed and injured. It's very difficult to hold this position. He continues, here the battles are going on every day. People are dying. People are not trained. There is no munition. At night, at least, you can see everything. They are all munition snipers. They have everything. Munitions, thermal imagers, quadcopters. They have everything. He continues. Oh, that scared me. Bit of his voice there. They see us, they draw us as they can, they take us into captivity. The sniper works very well on thermal imagers. At night, we just work on noise, on sound. We hold the position as we can. We do not give up. So the idea here is, I guess, that they are shooting at the opposition, the enemy, at the Ukrainians, by listening for where they are. They have no thermal imagery, whereas the Ukrainians do. And this goes back to that kind of asymmetry of equipment that we talked about before, particularly with night gear, where the Ukrainians have, since the beginning of the war, had something of an advantage. He says, but we are dying a lot here. Soon we will die. We'll start with hunger, from hunger to cold. I appeal to all residents of Kamchatka who are going to the Kamchatka battalion. Do not go. Do not go to this provocation. He says, there is a complete mutiny here. The whole army is fully armored, dressed. Yes, the armor is given, but not to everyone. And he talks about how he's, on his third armor, and he's finally got a good one. We hear so much about sort of bartering for equipment, how equipment doesn't get to the front line. It gets sort of this was at the beginning of the war, as reporting on this, that you would get trucks where the pallets were taken, well, not pallets because they don't use pallets, but the boxes of equipment were taken off bit by bit as a truck went forward towards the front line. By the time it got to the people who were actually fighting on the front line, all the good stuff had gone. And then the people who took the good stuff further back would then try and sell it to the people on the front line. The people who desperately need this equipment are having to buy it off the black market of people who had just nicked it off the truck previously. Anyway, so on and so forth. He's talking about having lost half a battalion. The people of the Kamchatka battalion, already half of them are gone. A lot of people have died because there's no food, nothing. You just set up children under the gunfire. Those who arrived and spent 2 days in Aleshki, here they were thrown right in front of everyone. I do not know how you will paint everyone, how you will look into the eyes of the parents of their children who are 18 to 20 years old. I just do not understand. I just do not understand you, Solodov. Maybe that's his commander. Why the hell do you do it? You just set up Kamchatka and led the people to slaughter to meet. I will return, and all the half who stayed here alive, we will return, Solodov. And just every people knows how you did with the people who signed this effing contract, believing that you will simply provide for this Kamchatka battalion. So maybe he's a governor of Kamchatka. We are here even just die of hunger because we have no water, no food, we have nothing. We cannot even go to the city to spend a penny to buy ourselves something because we are under shelling. We are not taken out of the city. We are not taken out. There is no such thing as someone at least substituting us. There's no rotation, he's saying. So, Solodov, a huge hello to you from all the guys who are still alive. I mean, this is damning stuff as ever. And this goes to the idea, I mentioned this in an earlier video today, that was being talked about by Gustav Gressel with Silicon Curtain. Bit of news, I'm going to be having a live chat with Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain on Friday morning, so check out that. It's Friday morning UK time, so American listeners might not see it live. But Gustav Gressel was talking about how these guys don't get to go back to their societies within Russia. They kind of shipped out to the war and they stay at the war basically until they die, or until the war finishes. But the war seems to be kind of endless at the moment. So you don't get this infiltration into Russian society of these people who are desperately unhappy with how things are going. And that then means that those negative opinions are kept. It's almost like Russia is inoculating itself from these negative opinions and from veterans who come back really disillusioned with the war. You just don't get that because they're kept constantly, on either on active duty, or when they are rotated, they have their downtime in the occupied territories of Ukraine, or at the most in Belarus. Then they don't get rotated and go back to their hometowns because they know damn well that if they get sent back to their hometowns, you won't get them back to the front line. So anyway, all that kind of dynamic. So Zelensky talks about this area. He talked about it last night, reported that after consultation with his staff, the defense capabilities, counter-battery work, electronic warfare, and air defense have been strengthened in the Kherson region, monitoring the implementation, he adds. So he's obviously cognizant of some of those successes in Kherson in terms of the capabilities, the electronic warfare and counter-battery work. Now, Russians have also complained, this is coming from Kolobok Rogov on Russian TV, complained that logistics between the Kimburn-Spit, Oleshki and Novaya, so Novokakhovka, have been lost. So this is, I presume, to say that all the way from Kimburn-Spit up to Novokakhovka, their logistics are ineffective. The Ukrainians are doing a good job of hitting the logistic lines with all sorts of drone activity, I would have thought, as well as artillery, HIMARS, etc., etc. And there was potential for a kind of move on Kimburn Peninsula with some footage that was released of boats, but that could have been from any time, and it could have been pretty much anywhere. So it's just a little bit of a rumour I reported on yesterday. Anyway, I thought that was worth adding, that they are moaning about logistics quite publicly there. That's on television. So this again appears to be the more positive area for the Ukrainians, although there's no confirmed gains there today. Most other places is looking pretty challenging for the Ukrainians, particularly Avdiivka and even Bakhmut as well. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Toodle pips and speak soon.